Hi, my name is Mariel Cruz, and today I will be presenting on the Hinkly groundwater contamination incident. For today's presentation, we will be discussing what caused the groundwater contamination in Hinkly, California, the health and economic implications as a result of the contamination. We'll be discussing the litigation and media coverage that gained nationwide attention to Hinkly, and we'll be covering the aftermath of the contamination and current efforts being done to date to resolve this issue. This table of contents slide provides a more clear agenda of the various discussion points that I will be covering over the next few minutes. So let's get started with discussing what happened in Hinkly. Hinkly is a small farming community in California. In the 1950s, Pacific Gas and Electric opened and operated a compressor station in Hinkly for their natural gas transmission pipeline. In order to prevent corrosion and rust of the machinery, Pacific Gas and Electric treated the compressor station with hexavalent chromium, or chromium-6, which is a very highly toxic carcinogen that can cause health problems if ingested at certain levels. Chromium-6 was disposed into unlined ponds in Hinkly, which eventually seeped into the groundwater and contaminated the drinking supply in the community. It wasn't until 1987 when Pacific Gas and Electric reported the increased levels of chromium-6 in the water. By then, residents in Hinkly, California did begin to experience health complications that aligned with the complications that are a result of consuming chromium-6. But before we move forward, I did want to provide a timeline for context on how this entire situation played out. As I previously mentioned, Pacific Gas and Electric was discharging chromium-6 into the groundwater drinking supply in Hinkly, California. This was from 1952 until 1966. It wasn't until 1987 when reports of polluted drinking water were actually discovered. Throughout the 1990s, legal action led by Erin Brockovich against PG&E began and was eventually settled for $333 million in 1996. Shortly after this lawsuit, a movie titled Erin Brockovich was released and detailed the story of Hinkly and the lawsuit, bringing nationwide attention to this community and the incident at hand. Since then, and continuing on today, PG&E is beginning to lead cleanup efforts to resolve the situation that they caused and to resolve the environmental hazard that was left upon Hinkly, California. A lot of this information we will cover in the following slides. So what is hexavalent chromium, and why did this leave so many health implications to the community? As I mentioned, chromium-6 is a highly toxic anti-corrosive agent. It's recognized as a carcinogen and is known to cause cancer. Again, with the disposal of this agent into the drinking water, residents of Hinkly were experiencing these ailments as a result of consuming chromium-6. The levels of chromium found in Hinkly were 10 times greater than the standards that were established in California in 1977. You'll see in this bar graph on the right-hand side of the screen that the comparison of chromium levels found in Hinkly compared to the rest of California and the national standard was truly severe. Data presented really here in this chart is really visually helpful in highlighting how much the levels in Hinkly exceeded any standards that were being set by governmental health agencies, again highlighting the severity of this case. Moving on to this data table, which provides context to what's expected or what's being monitored at the various chromium-6 levels, again, we're showing the severity of the Hinkly water contamination, how drastic their chromium levels are in compared to these more safe numbers. To call out a couple of statistics, 1 to 5 parts per billion is the average chromium-6 levels in U.S. groundwater, whereas chromium-6 levels in Hinkly was up to 580 parts per billion. Again, the severity of this incident was very, very high, and which is why it caused many health problems and economic problems to the community. Economic impacts. As a result of the contamination, there were significant economic impacts to the community. Population decline, people were leaving town, which you can clearly see in the illustrated line graph on the right-hand side. You can see that the trend of the population here is trending downward throughout the last 15 or so years as a result of this incident. Property values also began to drop and decrease, and Pacific Gas Electric began a buyout program purchasing homes from residents who no longer wanted to live in Hinkly. With people leaving The local school, post office, and markets also began to shut down. There weren't a need for these community services and facilities anymore. And lastly, the contaminated area continued to spread beyond ground zero, resulting in additional property owners being affected by this contamination. Honing in on the buyout program, Pacific Gas and Electric distributed a survey to the affected residents to get a sense of what solution people were leaning towards. Did they want an in-home purification system, or did they want to pursue the buyout program? As you can see from this pie chart, the results were overwhelmingly that residents were opting towards the buyout program. Nobody wanted to stay in Hinkly. And so in this program, which ran for about 4 years, Pacific Gas and Electric purchased about 300 properties, which they ended up destroying to eliminate squatters from living in those abandoned homes. Moving on to legal impacts and media coverage and the impact that this had on the situation. Aaron Brockovich was a legal clerk in LA who took Pacific Gas and Electric to court with a lawsuit for the contamination of the groundwater. Pacific Gas and Electric did end up settling for $333 million, which was then distributed to affected households in Hinkly. But because of the resiliency of Aaron Brockovich and the community, a film was developed which helped gain nationwide awareness of this environmental issue and additional media coverage of the dangers of chromium-6. This leads us to where we are today. The affected area, or plume, continues to expand beyond the original contamination area. Current research shows that the affected area is about 8 miles long and 2 miles wide, despite the efforts by PG&E to resolve this issue. PG&E is also leading a cleanup effort to reduce the chromium-6 levels down to its background level, which is the natural occurring level for the Hinkly groundwater, which is about 3.1 parts per billion. The widespread attention that this environmental hazard attained and the increased attention in drinking water led California to announce a new standard, the first in the nation, for a maximum chromium level, which is 10 ppb. So to summarize the important key points of this presentation, chromium-6 is a highly toxic carcinogen that was being discharged into groundwater supply in Hinkly, California. This impacted residents both from a health and economic standpoint, which caused disruption in their lives and likely long-term effects for all who were involved. Pacific Gas and Electric did have a lawsuit which they settled and are also committed to cleaning up the damage that they caused by converting the chromium-6 to chromium-3. They are not getting rid of the chromium-6, rather they are converting it to a nutrient chromium-3. Progress has been made, but the process is slow and can take anywhere from 11 to 50 years. It is also important to reiterate that the state of California passed a law standardizing the chromium-6 levels in drinking water in hopes to prevent environmental hazards from occurring again in the future and paving a way for healthier and safer drinking water. Thank you for listening to today's presentation on Hinkly groundwater contamination. I will conclude this presentation with a pause in my reference list, and I thank you again for your time today.